Globalism, it was supposed to be unbreakable. It was the post-war promise, the dream of one connected planet, open trade, shared rules, mutual prosperity. Borders would matter less, cooperation would matter more, and the idea of America first, it would eventually fade into history. But in 2016, Trump walked onto the world stage and didn't just question that vision. He ripped it apart. And now, more than 100 days into his second term as president, we're not watching the collapse of globalism. We're living in the aftershocks. This isn't about tweets. It's not about the optics. It's not about mean words or late-night talk shows. It's about what Trump actually did and what's still unfolding across the planet. Tariffs on foreign goods that realign global trade routes, a shattered alliance system where allies now fear being left behind, China scrambling to keep its economy afloat, Germany's industrial base under threat. Who would have ever thought that? Even Canada, our closest neighbor, now watching this revolution from the outside looking in. This isn't just chaos, it's his strategy. It's a radical reset of the system we were told could never be changed. Because the truth is, Trump didn't just break globalism, he revealed it was never working to begin with. Now here's what we're going to walk through in this video. We're going to show you how globalism was built, how it was always dependent on America playing nice. We'll walk through what Trump did in his first term that laid the groundwork, and what's happening right now in his second term that's making it permanent. We'll look at how countries like Mexico are adapting, how places like Germany and Canada are falling behind, and why China, despite its size and power, is now reacting, not leading. We'll dive into who's winning, who's losing, and why the people screaming the loudest have the most to lose if Trump's vision becomes the new default. Because this is the moment most of the world didn't prepare for. They thought the old system would hold, but Trump didn't just challenge the system, he's replacing it. And he's replacing it in real time. So grab a coffee, take a breath, and buckle in. Because if you've been told that Trump is destroying the world order, you might need to ask the bigger question. What if the world order was already dead? And what if this is what comes next? If you want to understand how Trump was able to break globalism, you have to understand how it was built in the first place. Because the truth is, it was always fragile. It just looked indestructible. Let's go back to 1944. The world was still at war, but the Allies, they had already begun planning the peace. At Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, 44 nations came together and agreed to a revolutionary idea. The United States would lead the construction of a global economic system. It would be based on free trade, stable currencies, and U.S. naval protection. The system had two pillars. America would protect global trade routes. Our Navy would keep sea lanes open, no questions asked, no payment required. America would open its markets, even if it meant losing jobs or running trade deficits. In return, America got loyalty. We built alliances, contained the Soviet Union, and avoided another world war. That was the logic. And for a while, it worked. Enter the Cold War era. From the 1950s to the 1980s, the U.S. led the capitalist world. Europe rebuilt under the Marshall Plan, Japan became a tech and auto giant, and America, we stayed dominant through industrial strength and global trust. But when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the reason for this whole setup, the security rationale, it vanished. We didn't adjust. We didn't demand allies pull their weight. We didn't renegotiate trade. We doubled down on globalism. We said, now everyone can join, even China. Enter the 1990s, the age of NAFTA and the WTO. In 1994, the U.S. signed NAFTA with Canada and Mexico. In 2001, China joined the World Trade Organization, with full U.S. backing, I might add. The bet was this. If we bring everyone into a single global system, they'll become peaceful, democratic, and just like us. But here's what actually happened. China used WTO rules to flood global markets, manipulate currency, and extract IP. American manufacturing collapsed. We lost over 60,000 factories between 2001 and 2015. Germany built its economic engine on exports, especially to China. Canada leaned on U.S. goodwill without building much strategic independence. And the U.S. became the world's consumer of last resort, racking up debt, running deficits, and losing leverage. In short, the free trade era worked for everyone but the country that built it. And through it all, no one pushed back. Republicans and Democrats both signed the deals. They told us cheaper goods meant better lives. They told us global competition would make us stronger. They told us industrial collapse was just the future of work. Well, they were wrong. Wages stagnated, towns died, dependency deepened, and by the mid-2010s, people started asking questions. But only one man stood up and said what everyone was starting to feel. This isn't working anymore. It's not you, it's us. That man was Donald Trump, not a diplomat, not a bureaucrat, not a multilateralist, but someone who saw the house was on fire and didn't ask permission to break down the door. So how did Trump go from calling out globalism to actively dismantling it? Well, it started in 2017, but really took shape in 2018 when the world got a glimpse of what would later become a complete trade revolution. And it began with something simple: tariffs. That's a shocker. When Trump announced tariffs on steel and aluminum imports, 25% on steel, 10% on aluminum, the media went into full meltdown. They called it a trade war. They said prices would spike. They said jobs would vanish. But what Trump was really doing was this: testing the system. He wanted to see who blinked. Would U.S. companies adapt? Would foreign exporters retaliate? Would American allies step up or expose their dependence? And what happened? Germany panicked. The EU scrambled to avoid escalation. China retaliated, but couldn't match Trump's leverage. Their exports rely far more on access to the U.S. than we do on theirs. Canada, they responded with tariffs on ketchup and dishwashers. Trump didn't just introduce tariffs, he exposed how fragile the global order actually was. Then came NAFTA, a deal every president before him had promised to fix, but none actually touched it. Trump scrapped it. He forced Canada and Mexico back to the table, dragged them through a tense negotiation, and signed the USMCA, the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement. What changed? Tighter rules of origin. You couldn't just route products through Mexico with Chinese parts anymore. Higher labor standards, minimum wages for Mexican auto workers, leveling the playing field. Digital trade protections that never existed under the old deal. And guess what? It worked. Even skeptics now admit the USMCA was more modern, more enforceable, and a template for future trade deals. Trump showed that bilateral leverage beats multilateral obedience. He wasn't interested in joining new global systems. He wanted to use America's market access like a weapon. Let's talk about China. This is where the strategy got clear. Trump imposed hundreds of billions in tariffs on Chinese goods, targeting everything from steel to solar panels to semiconductors. China responded, but they were boxed in. Why? Because while U.S. consumers could substitute Chinese goods, China couldn't replace the U.S. market. Their entire industrial model depended on selling to America. And that meant Trump's tariffs, they had teeth. Behind the scenes, he also blacklisted Huawei, pushed allies to ban Chinese telecom infrastructure, and rewrote export rules to deny China access to critical chip-making technology. This wasn't trade policy, it was an economic containment. And it laid the foundation for what we're seeing now in Trump's second term. But here's what most people missed in the first term. It wasn't just what Trump did, it's what he exposed. NATO allies weren't paying their fair share. China never planned to reform. Canada was asleep at the wheel. Germany had no backup plan for its export addiction. And the U.S., it was far more self-sufficient than the world believed. Trump didn't destroy globalism in his first term. He just made it clear it could be destroyed. And that alone was enough to break the illusion. Okay, so now we're in Trump's second term, and the testing phase is over. This time, he's not just experimenting with tariffs. He's building a new system. The first Monday of his return to the White House, when Trump signed an executive order reinstating and expanding U.S. tariffs across multiple sectors. The numbers were bold. 25% tariffs on all Chinese imports, no more carve-outs, 100% tariffs on electric vehicles from China, pharmaceutical tariffs designed to break our dependence on Chinese generic drug precursors, new steel and auto tariffs that included U.S. allies, not just adversaries. The last part sent shockwaves through Europe and Canada, because it signaled something clear. Trump's goal wasn't to punish enemies. It was to force everyone, friend or foe, to bring their manufacturing back to U.S. soil or risk losing access to the American consumer. This was the execution phase of the American First economic doctrine. Let's break it down country by country. China. China's export machine kicked into overdrive in early 2025, not because it was thriving, but because it knew Trump's tariffs were about to shut the gate. EV makers like BYD and NIO raced to dump vehicles into Europe and Southeast Asia. Chinese steel firms undercut global markets, trying to maintain volume. But U.S. access? Gone. With tariffs at 100%, Chinese goods are simply priced out of the American market. And it's not just tariffs. The Trump administration is now pushing legislation that would block U.S. pension funds from investing in Chinese firms and ban Chinese purchases of American farmland and critical infrastructure. This is decoupling on purpose, and Beijing knows it. They can't win this trade war because they can't lose access to the American economy. And Trump, he's not offering a deal. He's offering a way out on his terms. Germany. Germany is the classic example of a country that bet on globalism and lost. Their economy runs on exports, and those exports require cheap Russian energy, open access to U.S. and Chinese markets, global trust in the Made in Germany label. They're all three in a crisis now. Russian gas is politically toxic, Chinese demand is flatlining, And Trump's new auto tariffs target German EVs directly. Volkswagen, Mercedes, and BMW, they're all cutting jobs, delaying production, and warning of existential threats to the German model. Meanwhile, Trump is telling Ford and Tesla to build at home or get out of the way. Canada. Then there's Canada, America's closest cultural and geographic ally. But in the new system, Canada is not automatically protected. Under former Prime Minister Trudeau, Canada coasted on U.S. goodwill. Now with Mark Carney in office, the country is trying to pivot, but it may be too little too late. The U.S. Inflation Reduction Act and new tariff laws has funneled billions into U.S.-based clean energy and battery production. Meanwhile, Canada's heavily subsidized Volkswagen battery plant is already behind schedule and under fire for being uncompetitive. And as Trump's pharmaceutical reshoring ramps up, Canadian companies that were once backup suppliers are being pushed aside. This isn't isolationism, it's realignment. And Canada is being told, if you want to be part of the system, invest here, bring jobs here, or be treated like any other foreign exporter. Mexico. Now here's the curveball. Mexico is winning. Under Trump's reshoring policies, Mexico has become one of the biggest beneficiaries of supply chain diversification. Tesla is expanding in Nuevo Leon. Taiwanese and South Korean firms are building factories in Baja California. American suppliers are relocating from China to Mexico to take advantage of the USMCA rules. Mexico is now being viewed not as a threat, but as a strategic extension of the U.S. industrial base. And the difference? Mexico leaned in. They aligned with Trump's economic vision, and they're getting rewarded for it. In just over 100 days, Trump's second term has done more to rewrite global trade map than any administration in modern history, whether you like him or not. The media doesn't know what to do with that because they still want to argue about tone, about style, about decorum, which he has none of any of those. But the world isn't reacting to tweets anymore. It's reacting to policy. And the policy is clear. Well, not really clear, but you know what I mean. If you want access to the U.S. market, earn it. This isn't just a trade reset. It's the construction of a new American-led economic world. Now, will the rest of the world fall? I don't know. And it's happening in real time. Everything we've talked about so far, tariffs, trade deals, reshoring, realignment, that's the policy layer. But underneath it all is something deeper, an ideological war. Trump didn't just break trade norms. He declared war on the founding of the idea of globalism, that interdependence guarantees peace. And for the first time in decades, someone said, no, it just guarantees dependence. For decades, globalists told us that if we integrated the world economically, nations wouldn't want to go to war. They said it would make everyone richer, safer, smarter. That was the promise from Davos, from Brussels, from the World Bank, from The Economist, from every administration since Reagan. It wasn't just policy, it was doctrine. And in their version of the world, sovereignty was outdated. Borders were a hassle, manufacturing was inefficient, nationalism was a threat. The perfect world was one where ideas, money, and products moved across borders faster than people or governments could react. Then Trump came in and said, the emperor has no clothes. Let's talk about who that threatened. Number one, the Davos class. The political and financial elite, who meet every year in Switzerland to talk about inclusive growth. They hated Trump, not because of his attitude, but because he rejected their entire framework. He didn't care about ESG indexes. He didn't want stakeholder capitalism. He wanted American factories, American workers, and American leverage. He said what they wouldn't. Globalism is a luxury America can't afford anymore. Number two, the Euro-Atlantic bureaucracy, the EU, NATO, IMF, WTO, they all operate on the assumption that the U.S. will lead by consensus. Well, Trump flipped that. He told NATO, pay your share or we leave. He told the WTO, your rulings don't matter if they hurt the U.S. workers. He told Paris climate crowd, we won't commit to emission cuts while China builds coal plants. And most importantly, he backed it all with action. He withdrew from TPP. He froze U.S. funding to the WHO. He moved the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem without asking anyone's permission. And he turned bilateral pressure into a global realignment strategy. His own opposition at home? Let's be honest, Washington isn't just divided by party. It's divided by worldview. Even in his own party, there were people who thought Trump's moves were reckless. But here's the irony. Joe Biden kept almost all of Trump's major trade policies. Tariffs on China, they stayed. Buy American rules, expanded. Reshoring incentives, increased. CHIPS Act, modeled on Trump's goals. They didn't want to admit it, but they adopted the blueprint because the alternative was going back to a world that no longer exists. Even Biden's national security strategy in 2022 quietly acknowledged that America's supply chains are vulnerable and resilient sourcing is a national security issue. In other words, Trump was right. So what happens when the globalist class loses credibility? Well, they start to panic. You'll hear words like isolationism, protectionism, economic nationalism. You'll hear that America is abandoning its allies. You'll hear that this is a dangerous turn inward. But here's the truth. America isn't isolating itself. It's prioritizing itself. There is a difference. We're still engaging, still trading, still leading. We're just no longer doing it as the world's safety net. And here's the line Trump drew, and it's changed everything. We don't owe the world anything. We owe our citizens everything. It's that sentence, not any speech or tweet, that drew the deepest divide between Trump and the globalist model. And now, that sentence has become policy. Okay, so if globalism is broken and the old order isn't coming back, what's going to replace it? The answer has already taken shape, and it looks nothing like the world we grew up in. My God, it looks nothing like it. This is the new map. This is not of geography, but of economic alignment. And it's not global. It's regional, it's strategic, it's brutally pragmatic. North America, from free trade zone to fortress, the US, Mexico, and possibly Canada are now emerging as the world's most secure industrial bloc. We have the energy, we have the land, we have the labor through Mexico, and we also have the capital, and most importantly, we have the consumer market everyone else still needs. Trump's policies have turned the USMCA into a leverage tool instead of a loophole. Cars must meet strict rules of origin to qualify for zero tariffs. Mexican wages must hit minimum thresholds. Foreign inputs, especially from China, disqualify products from U.S. access. This isn't just trade. This is a continental manufacturing policy backed by law, enforced by tariffs, and run from Washington. Canada, the weak link in the chain, and yet Canada still isn't fully in. Mark Carney talks about competitiveness, but Canada's industrial sector is unprepared. They lean too hard on American defense and Chinese trade. Now they find themselves caught in between. Will Canada join this North American production zone? Or will it become a boutique economy, reliable, polite, and strategically irrelevant? Under Trump's second term, the message is clear. We're not dragging you along this time. Get serious or get left behind. China, desperate to stay relevant. Meanwhile, in the East, China is scrambling. On paper, it still looks strong. Second largest economy, massive export volumes, vast manufacturing base. But underneath the surface, demographics are collapsing, property markets are imploding with demographics collapsing, youth unemployment is off the charts, and Trump's tariffs are cutting off the most profitable buyers, Americans. Xi Jinping's regime is pushing the Belt and Road harder than ever, trying to lock in dependency through debt to the Middle East and South Asia. But even that's backfiring. Pakistan just defaulted on Chinese loan. Kenya and Zambia are calling for debt restructuring. Italy walked away from the Belt and Road entirely. And here's the big shift. China used to lure the world with growth. Now, it's holding them with leverage that never lasts. Europe, energy poor, aging, and unsure. Europe is facing a harsh reality. They built their post-Cold War economy on three assumptions. The U.S. would always defend them. Russia would provide cheap energy. China would buy their exports. Trump's return has shattered all three. He's told NATO to step up or be sidelined. He made U.S. energy cheaper than ever, draining Russia's leverage. And he's making it harder for Europe to sell into America without building here. Germany's economy is already faltering. France is politically divided. The EU is losing relevance on the world stage. And unlike the U.S., Europe can't go it alone. They don't have energy. They don't have demographic strength. And they don't have a unified defense force. In this new map, Europe isn't a power center. It's a reactive region, hoping for stability while everyone else moves on. Now let's talk about BRICS. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. For years, this was supposed to be the anti-NATO, the symbol of a multipolar world. But what is it today? Brazil's economy is stagnant. Russia is isolated and obviously bleeding capital and people. India won't commit to any bloc. China's dominance is resented by the others. And their only real power, anti-dollar rhetoric, hasn't translated. Okay, so now that globalism is broken and the New World map is emerging, What comes next? Not just for countries, but for people. For the average worker, for the small business owner, for anyone trying to understand why prices are shifting, shelves are thinning, and alliances are fracturing. The answer? This is the transition. The old normal is gone. And what comes next won't feel like a global boom. It'll feel like a rebuild. First, get used to tariffs as a permanent feature, not a negotiation tool. For decades, tariffs were considered economic weapons or temporary threats. Trump has changed that. In his second term, they've become the backbone of industrial policy. You want to sell into the U.S. market? Build here, hire here, or pay a price. This is forcing foreign manufacturers from EVs to pharmaceuticals to either open plants in America or lose competitiveness. Yes, it raises prices in the short term, but it also builds supply chains we can trust. This is a shift back to something America hasn't had since World War II, a national industrial strategy. We're not just talking about tax breaks, we're talking about long-term subsidies for semiconductors, batteries, rare earths, federal support for critical infrastructure, manufacturing, state-level recruitment of global firms to relocate production. For decades, the globalist model said, government shouldn't pick the winners. Trump's model says, we pick winners or China will. Expect more tension inside what used to be called the West. Europe will resist, Canada will complain, Japan and South Korea will hedge, and many will ask, why is the U.S. acting so selfish? But Trump's answer is clear. America has carried the burden long enough. From NATO to the WTO to the UN, many of the institutions that defined post-war cooperation are either being redefined or quietly ignored. They don't align with the new system because they were built for a world that needed America to guarantee peace. And that's no longer the case. Strategic friendships, not global commitments. Trump's foreign policy now operates on a new model. Bilateral leverage, strategic alignment, and transactional trust. It's not about spreading democracy. It's about rewarding cooperation and punishing dead weight. Mexico, for instance, is becoming a trusted partner, not because of shared values, but because they're building alongside us. Meanwhile, countries like Germany and Canada, who want the benefits without contributing, they're losing access. It's not personal, it's policy. One big question is always the dollar. Will de-dollarization take hold? The answer? Not yet. Yes, the BRICS nations talk about alternatives. Yes, China and Russia settle trades in yuan and rupees, but trust matters more than mechanics. And for all its flaws, the US dollar still offers the most liquid financial system, the most stable legal framework, and now under Trump, a trade policy that's centered around American strength. In fact, Trump's demand that nations produce inside the US only deepens the dollar's relevance. If you want access to US consumer base, you're going to need dollars to get there. The real risk? Internal pressure. If there's a real threat to this transition, it's not from China, it's not Europe, it's not even inflation, it's American patience. Because this transition hurts. It hurts in the short term. Prices probably will rise, global options may narrow, comfortable dependencies, they're going to break. And not everyone's ready for that. Trump's challenge now isn't foreign diplomacy. It's selling this reset to the people who have to live through it. That means real wins. Factories reopening, wages rising, local economies